Alright everybody, I think we're recording. We're going to do a little vlogging and a little more testing. This is my September 7th revision of my fuel map. And there's a thunderstorm over there I need to be mindful of. So I'm still playing around with my throttle settings, trying to make it aggressive, more powerful in the mid-range, more sporty and feisty. I like a feisty bike, and a thunderstorm that way. Some bitch. Anyway, so playing around with that. It does take off, and it does wheelie much easier, but I'm trying to find the line where I've got less. Alright, so I'm trying to remember which videos I've posted. I did one yesterday, but I don't think I actually put it up, so I'm redoing it. So what I've been doing is playing around with the ride-by-wire tables, because I've had some feedback from people. They're like, well, you know, the one they tried my tune where I just de-restricted it and had a little fuel, a little bit of ignition tweaks, but they're like, in the mid-range, you know, DNK's tune does seem really stronger. And I'm like, you know what, that doesn't make any sense, because if she did an actual custom dyno map, she would have had to disable SAI and the O2 sensors. And those maps, because people have sent them to me, they don't have it. I can't see what her tune is because the tune is locked, and I don't feel like paying $300 for the pro license, and then sitting there having to guess. I guess I could probably write a script, you know, have something that'll, you know, go run through the pins, and as long as there's nothing written into the software that says, you know, after so many pins it locks you out or puts a timer in between to try a brute force attack. But I'm kind of torn on. I almost want to do that, pay the $300, and then just sit there and figure out a way to go through all the passwords until I get the right one, because it's only a 4-digit pin, so technically there's 9,999 combinations that could potentially be in there. Well, 10,000, I guess, if you count zeros. But anyway, whatever. So yeah. So I'm trying to think, like, how does she get in that? How is she getting more power in there if she's not doing a full tune? And on most of those maps, I don't believe they're full tunes. A couple, if she's got the bike. I think she did throw it on a local dyno and probably threw the guy a few shekels to come up with a map, and now she's selling it. Whatever. I don't begrudge her that. My issue for her is her shitty attitude in customer service, and that she's also not an honest person. Caught her in a couple lies now. Actually documented. It's proven to be lies. But I'm not going to get into that now. Whatever. So I'm like, why is hers seeming so much more? And what I'm thinking is, and so I started experimenting, and I think I figured that out. Why her map seems stronger in the mid-range? It's because I just kind of went into my first revisions. I just took the limitations out of the top end, you know, and you can see them in my other videos where you give it 100% throttle and it would only deliver 90, then it would cut back to 81 or 84, and you know, okay, I could see exactly where they were clipping power up top. But I never really thought to go and play in the mid-range. And then once I started thinking about it, I'm like, well, let me open up sport mode and see what other restrictions, you know, the obvious ones, the low-hanging fruit was up top. But then I look in there and it's like, you give it 60% throttle and it's giving you 45. If you give it 30% throttle, it's giving you 17. I'm like, wait a minute, there's restrictions all over this place. All up in this bitch, as the kids say. I think are the kids still saying that? Anyway, so I went in and made a very linear, aggressive throttle map. And, you know, we've talked before, I'm not tuning the bike yet. This is just getting rid of restrictions and getting the throttle response where I want, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it really transforms the bike. You know, you say, well, you're not tuning, so the bike doesn't make any more power. No, but if you're at 50% throttle at 6,000 RPMs or whatever, before, it was only giving you 30%, so you were making less power. It's not that I've made the motor more powerful. I'm just telling the ECU, give me more of the power, unleash more of the power, don't hold it back. When I whack the throttle to 60%, I want 60% throttle, not 47. So I'm going to go through a few iterations of that, and a lot of the the response has been good. I mean, it's just instant thrust now. There's no waiting for it to build revs and then it gives it to you. You know, that's what you want in road mode. But in sport, to me, I'm like, no, gimme. I want the power. When I ask for the power, don't delay, don't ease it on. I'll worry about the smoothness. So my latest iteration here, the September 7th one, because I've had to back out a little bit low because it made it just a little herky and jerky. Very small throttle inputs had bigger than I wanted impacts. When you're just cruising around at like 5% maintenance throttle, just kind of loping along, you don't want it surging, or every time you hit a bump, you move the throttle a fraction of a millimeter and the bike's lunging forward, or, you know, you got engine braking. And so I've had to tweak that area down there. So what I've got basically is it's more aggressive than stock in sport by a sort of significant margin. Lady, what are you doing? Turn. Yeah, it just wants to wheelie now every time I give it gas at first. And so what it was doing is it's a little too abrupt down low. So I went in this morning, pulled out some of the aggressiveness. Below 10%, it's a little more than stock, but not massively, but it's a little bit more. So you do feel it. It's a little bit snappier. It wants to rev a little quicker instead of rolling the throttle, and it kind of goes, you roll it and there's like a delay where it goes and it goes up. You want to do it where you just brap, but not too much to where it's herky and jerky. So I've been basically taking out some of my optimizations down low. But once you start hitting 23% throttle, it's giving you 21. By the time you hit 30, it's completely linear. Whatever you dial it to, that's what it delivers. So it starts off a little slower, but better than stock, and then it comes on. So I'm liking where it is right now. And then what I've also done now is, if you still find that abrupt, you know, when you're up in the mountains or you're on a track day, that's what you want, okay? You want to go play, you want to do wheelies, you want to hang with your sport bike friends as much as you can on this kind of a bike and go play a bit, then that's what you got sport mode for. That is your now hooligan mode, okay? Or instead of S for sport, it's S for stupid mode. And very, very aggressive. The bike is making just so much more power in the mid-range. You give it gas, and it just goes and wants to pull. It feels awesome. This feels more like a sport bike. It's not going to replace my ZX14 anytime soon, but you get the point. And then now what I've done is I took road mode and got rid of the top end restrictions. So the 70%, 90 and 100% throttle areas up top towards redline that were held back, I've uncorked it. So road is every bit as smooth, low end docile, mid-range smooth, mellow. But if you do give it full throttle and you get up in the revs, it will deliver full power. It's not going to hold it back anymore. So road is sort of like a slightly muted old sport mode. It's unrestricted, so it is a full power mode now, but it's still mellow. And sport mode is now, there's a lot more urgency. There's a lot more, okay, let's go. Some people may not like that. I can tone it down a little bit down lower and make it a little more gradual, getting into that power band. If you're not going to stay back there all the way, I guess I'll pull up. I don't know why people do that. They leave like a parking spot and a half there. And that'll be the same person that the light changes, and they'll sit there staring at their phone for 10 seconds when you got a 20-second light before they even start moving. So thank you very much. I'll just jump in there and take that. So anyway, that's what I'm playing with now, and I think I've got it just about where I want it. So that's the map. I'm not going to do the full custom dyno tune until I get the new headers. I'm not going to throw it on the dyno and tune it, go to the trouble. I think, I've got my fuel trims in there. I've been playing with that as well as ignition, and the bike feels brilliant. I think if I gave it to my tuner, he'd run it and go, it's a little lean here, it's a little rich there. I could probably clean it up and get you 1.5 horsepower. I don't feel like there's any real power to be had. I'm going to wait until I get the damn headers and get rid of the box underneath, get rid of the cat. And at that point, I'll do the full tune, because maybe then I'm picking up 4 or 5 horsepower by getting rid of all the restrictions. I'm just going to map it once and call it a day. Right now, it's feeling great. So, Anyway, I'll go do a couple little polls and play a little bit as I talk. So the vlogging thing here, I've read a couple things today that irritate me, and I'm trying so hard not to be a dick online, because I know I someone says something, I'm like, no, that's just wrong, and people don't want to hear that they're wrong, even when you prove it to them. So the two things I saw today was people were asking, like someone was asking on the Try Improve, hey, what spring should I get? I want to get improve my handling and suspension, because these bikes do tend to need work, especially if you've got the one prior to this. This Marzocchi cartridge setup, while it's not adjustable, is actually decent. The shocks are shit. That's why I've replaced them with Öhlins, and my new springs will be here tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. We're going to do a install video of the new springs on the shocks. But I see someone else saying, oh no, progressives are the way to go. And it's like, no. That's what the bike comes with. The manufacturers put progressive springs in because they don't know how much you weigh. So they're like, well, we'll put something in there that'll accommodate, it'll soak up the bumps and be comfortable. It'll work for the wide range of people. But it's a jack of all trades and master of none. They'll be okay to the average buyer. And that's all they can hope for. Suspension is a very specific science. There's a lot of physics that go into it. You want to have your suspension parts working in unison. And so the problem with progressives is they tend to be too soft in the first part of the stroke, and then they get too stiff at the end. Well, the problem is your spring rate, you want it to be linear. And so my point to the guy was, look, if you have to replace your springs because they're shit, they're stock springs and they're just not working for you, they don't cost any more to get linear springs. You're buying a set of springs anyway. They're just as easy to install. It's not like, well, one's easier, it's more convenient. So why would you go for the inferior progressive springs rather than just ordering linear springs for your weight? And here's why. The progressive springs, they may be stiffer than the stock ones that are like, rubber bands, so they may be a improvement, but if you're going to spend the same amount of money and the same amount of time installing them, why not install the linear ones that will give you a consistent feel, whether you're riding soft, whether you're riding aggressively? Because here's the thing, your damping rates on your bikes are static. Now, I say that assuming you don't have electronically adjusting with spool valves like the Öhlins and stuff that adjust on the fly. So your suspension settings are static otherwise, even if they're adjustable. You're not adjusting them as they go down the road. Oh, I'm going to do a bunch of braking. I don't want as much fork dive, so let me turn up the compression. That's what the electronic ones do. Regular manual suspension is either going to be non-adjustable or adjustable. If it's non-adjustable, nothing happens. If it is adjustable, you set it up for you and your weight and your riding and all that, and you go and ride it. It's typically going to be a set it and forget it kind of thing for most people. Well, when you set it, or if you're using damping rods and you're controlling, if it's not adjustable, so you're just going to change fork oil or whatever as a crude way of adjusting your damping, you're adjusting for those springs. The springs hold up the bike and your weight, and then you control how quickly it dives and you control how quickly it comes back. That's compression and rebound. Well, how do you set up valving and damping rates for a spring that has two very different pressures depending on where you are in the stroke? So if you set up your compression and damping for the first part of the stroke, then when you get to the stiffer part of the spring and that spring is pushing back much harder, your rebound damping is not going to be enough. It's going to pogo. It's going to bounce back instead of being a controlled going up and down. If you say, all right, I'm gonna damp it for the hard part where it's near to bottoming out, then your damping is going to be hard as a rock up top in the soft part of the stroke because the spring isn't doing as much. And so the damping that you set for the stiffer part of the spring is going to be inadequate for the first part. So that's why I'm telling the guy, look, if you're going to put springs in anyway, order the damn linear springs and then set up your suspension for that. your damping has no way to know where you are in the stroke, and so to adjust and get a good damping rate for the soft part of your progressive spring versus the hard, the stiff part of the progressive spring. You get a linear spring, and then you set your clickers, or if it's a set, it's a damping rod type, maybe you try thicker oil or something like that to get it balanced, and that way you have consistent travel through the stroke of the suspension. And he's just not getting it. And he's like, well, you have your opinions, I have mine. It's like, dude, go to Dave Moss Tuning, go to an Olin's Tech, go to Race Tech. They'll sell both springs because a lot of Harley guys are like, well, I'll just put progressives in there because they've got non-adjustable forks, and they just, you pull out the fork that's in there and you just drop in a stiffer one, and to them it's no longer bottoming out. For the average buyer who knows nothing about suspension, doesn't know how it works, doesn't care how it works, and doesn't really care about performance riding, those progressives may be okay. But it still comes back to, just because you have an opinion, because you've got limited understanding, and he's like, well, I'm buying from Tech Bike Parts, and look, I've used their parts before. I use their cam and my street cup. But to sit there and say, well, I'm not going to listen to Olin's, I'm not going to listen to Race Tech, I'm not going to listen to Dave Moss, I'm not going to listen to what racers do. You think there's any race grid where the people are using progressive springs? No, because they need consistent and predictable handling. And that means you need to know what that spring's going to be pushing back, what force it's going to take to overcome that spring, and how far it's going to push back, and you need to adjust all your damping rates to match it. And you cannot match damping to progressive springs because the pressure from the spring fluctuates. And I'm trying to explain to him and say, look, this isn't a matter of opinion. I didn't invent science. I didn't invent physics. This is how it works. Well, you're not going to convince me my opinion's wrong. My opinion's just as good as anyone else's. And that's where I get annoyed, because it's like, no, you're just not intelligent enough to know the fucking difference. I'm taking the time to actually explain to you how this shit works, and I'm pointing you towards videos where engineers are explaining this, and you're being a numpty. You're being a muppet. And, well, I believe what I believe. And that's fine if you want to sit there and argue about, if you think the world is flat, you can have that opinion. But it doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean your opinion's valid. And I don't have to respect your opinion if your opinion is stupid. And I think that's where I have a hard time just shutting my mouth and being like, all right, this guy's a retard, just let him believe whatever. Because I see, in my head, I'm like, well, he's responding to someone else's request for advice. So he's asking for opinions. And then this guy's coming in with ignorance because he just doesn't know any better. He may mean well. He may be a nice guy. But his opinion is wrong. It's not based on anything scientific. It's not based on data. It's not based on anything that any good suspension tech is going to tell you outside of a Harley dealership. So it's really annoying that people just don't. This isn't rocket science. I'm not a genius for knowing this stuff. I research it. I talk to legit pro suspension techs, Traction Dynamics. Huey was a certified Olin's Tech. Kent and Tony up at GMD CompuTrack, the guys that do like a whole shitload of Moto America race teams and stuff. Like, I talk to them and they take their good, unlike DNK, they'll take the time to answer questions. They will take the time to explain the what and the why. And you walk in with an idea, I want to do this, and before you know it, they're like, you tell me what it is you're trying to do, and we, the pros, will figure out how to get you there. And more often than not, you walk in the first few times, and you find out what you thought you knew about this stuff is wrong. But trying to explain to somebody who isn't even interested in learning, and I guess that's the difference. I have strong opinions, but I'm willing to listen to someone who's qualified and who knows, and I'm willing to learn. And then I pass that information on to the next person, and so on. Some folks aren't capable of that. They just think, well, I have an opinion, and opinions are, one's just as valid as another. Well, it depends on how you arrived at that opinion. If you arrived at that opinion out of sheer ignorance, no, your opinion's not worth anything. I don't have to respect it. And I'm perfectly fine telling you that your opinion isn't valid. If you're telling me about colors, what sound you like, ergonomics, personal preferences, Yeah, that is completely subjective. One's a matter of opinion, and your opinion is every bit as good as mine. But if we're talking about like air-fuel ratios and how a motor works, or oil viscosity, or how a piece of suspension works, no, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. So that annoyed me today. Then I see a video, and this guy's a nice guy. I'm not even going to give his channel because he's a nice guy. He means well. But he's a car guy who recently got, relatively recently got into bikes. And he bought a Ducati Monster, the one that my wife's got. And had this video. He was talking about top speed run. I'm like, oh, because I'm trying to find out. I'm like, oh, I wonder how fast my wife's bike is. I haven't had a chance to get it on the interstate and really see what it can do or get it on track. I'm trying to talk her into a track day in next month and see if I could take it out for a session on Road Atlanta. But I'm like, oh, I wonder what the top speed on that is. And I see the video. Oh, top speed run. So I go in. He's got it on the dyno. And he's like, yeah, the speedometer said 160 on the dyno. And I'm like, dude, is this a joke? I'm like, that doesn't tell you anything as far as top speed. That's the theoretical top speed in a vacuum. You're not. And he's like, gives the typical defensive response of guy who doesn't know much about motorcycles. No, don't sit there and be a keyboard warrior, you know. My tuner knows what he's doing. He put a 20% resistance on the drum to simulate wind resistance. And I'm just looking at it and I'm like, you're joking. Am I being punked? Like, it's like, how do you know 20% is the number? First of all, your speedo's off 5%, guarantee it. So that 160 you saw on the dash for a fleeting half second as you bounced off the rev limiter was probably more like 152. But again, that's on the dyno. That's no wind resistance. That bike at best makes 100 horsepower at the wheel. That's it. That's all it makes. It's a naked bike with suspension, with budget suspension components. I mean, he's all, I know he's very impressed because I got a Ducati. It's like, yeah, you bought the entry-level Ducati. You bought almost the cheapest Ducati they make. You bought one of the slowest Ducatis, other than the Scramblers. The Monster is a great bike. My wife's got one. I am very impressed with it. It is a fun, great little bike. But in the world of Ducati, it's slower than an MT-09. The Yamaha would spank the shit out of it on a track or top speed. So anyway, I'm looking at it, I was like trying to explain it to him. And again, it's one of those things where people just, they don't know it. They know just enough to almost be dangerous. And as someone who's spent a lot of time on bikes, a lot of time in dyno rooms, a lot of time on track, a lot of time goofing around, it's like, I know the difference between being on the dyno. And I explained to him, I was like, I could drop 8 teeth off my rear sprocket on my ZX14, and on the dyno, it'll say it's doing 245 miles an hour. But I would never, if I then took that bike with that gear ratio and put it on the road, I'd be lucky to break 190, 180. Because wind resistance is going to hold me back. And he's like, well, we put 20% on the drum. It's like, okay, that might be the right number for 91 miles an hour, but it's not a static amount. The faster you go, the more the wind pushes back, which means you need even more horsepower to push against the wind to get to the next 5 mile an hour, tier. And then it's going to push back a little harder. And so it's not as simple as 5 horsepower gets you 5 miles an hour kind of deal. It might under 100, but as you go past 130, 5 horsepower might get you 3 miles an hour. And once you get over 140, 5 horsepower might only get you 2 more miles an hour. It's a game that eventually you're going to lose. And there's just no way, even take speedo error out, that bike is not breaking a legit 150 on the road. Unless you're going downhill with Danny Pedrosa on it in the tightest tuck you've ever seen with a 15, 20 mile an hour tailwind, there is no way that bike is going 150. But he's like a lot of 600 guys. Oh, my 600 does 175 and hangs with boosas. Shut up. It doesn't. You're saying that because you couldn't afford the really fast bike, and to you, that's the fastest bike you've ever had, so it's the bee's knees. And you don't want to admit to your faster friends, you're trying to make it sound like you got something more than you do. And you don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. You could probably hit a legit 140 on a Monster on a really nice, straight, smooth road in a tight tuck with no, headwind. Maybe. You might hit a GPS verified 140, and honestly, that's, after having ridden her bike, that's probably pushing it to expect that. Realistically, that's a 130, 135 mile an hour bike, topped out. It just is. It's 100 horsepower, it's naked, it doesn't have the best aerodynamics. Suspension's going to be bopping all over the place. It just is what it is. But trying to explain that to people who, we all have ego. I certainly have ego, but at the end of the day, it's science and facts. But you've got a lot of guys that are into motorcycles, and it's all about the ego, and you're telling them that their bike isn't as fast. Well, it either is or it isn't. The bike does what it does, but you telling them that, you're not, in their minds, you're not telling them, hey, dude, your bike's just not that fast. Because what you're telling them is they're not as cool as they thought they were. They're not as fast as they thought they were. And all the bragging they've been doing their friends trying to convince them of that, they react very harshly because on some level there may be some insecurity, They know, he knows it's a cool bike, but he also knows it's an entry-level bike. It's one of the slower Ducatis on the market. But he's, he likes the hits and the views, and he likes to be able to tell his buddies he's got a 160 mile an hour bike. And the reality is he doesn't. He's got a 135 mile an hour bike. A 600 would absolutely rape him. Now the 600, he'll probably pull off the line because he's got the torque. But once they get rolling, the 600 has got an extra 15, 20 horsepower. More importantly, much superior aerodynamics. It will slice through the wind like a scalpel while he's like a brick wall. Here's a little test. I'm going a scant 68 miles an hour. I put my hand out like this, very little wind resistance. I put my hand out this way, and now the wind is pushing back much harder. I'm actually having to push my hand forward. When I do it this way, it slices through the wind. That's very small surface area, and that's at not even 70 miles an hour. Think of all this frontal area, all of my chest and frontal area going 130. Think about standing in the middle of a damn hurricane blowing at you at 130. It's a good amount of force pushing back at you. And if it ups to 150, you can't stand. If it goes to 170, you're blowing down the sidewalk, right? And so people don't understand that. Got this Beamer guy that I just raped him pulling off the line. He was trying to pull up behind me. We'll see if we get to drag race him at the next light. He'll kill me once we're rolling, and especially top speed, but from a dig, this isn't a fast bike, but it's quick. It'll beat a lot of cars. At least up to 50, 60, 70, miles an hour, maybe. After that, I don't know. There's definitely some shit weather up there. But anyway, it's like I'm trying to find a way to... you see a lot of my videos. Yes, I've got strong opinions. But I also try to help the community. I'm trying to build maps for people to do stuff, give to the community, not charging anything for it. I'm just trying to freaking help and spread knowledge because that's how I learned. Because I had the pleasure of working with guys like Huey, guys like Chris Opie Kaler, former pro road racer, Mark Sutton from the Duck Shop, Chris Moore up at Moore Mafia, world record holder, drag racer, and engine builder and tuner. I mean, I've had the luxury, for a while my Ducati guy up at NPR Ducati, Vic was Doug Poland's Ducati factory team for World Superbike mechanic the years that Doug won the world championships for Ducati. He was wrenching on my bikes. And all these people were really cool, chill dudes, a lot of knowledge. Huey, another phenomenal tuner and mechanic. Now he's out of the business now. He's working on rockets or something for Jeff Bezos' company. But, you know, I have the pleasure of working with a lot of really good, Charles at HFD1, another really good tuner. You know, and so when I hear things, I try to correct those people and be like, no, here's how it works. And it's just amazing watching how many people they just dig in. They're so secure in their ignorance. They just know what they know, when what they know is demonstrably wrong. But they believe it because they want to believe it. They want to believe their bike is faster than it is. They want to believe that, you know, they bought a 600 and it can hang with the Busa. And you're like, no, it doesn't. It can't. Up in the twisties, yeah. If you're a good rider, yeah. 600 will run circles around a Hayabusa up on the Dragon. But trying to get through to people, I really struggle, because it's like, first I just say, well, no, it's this. And then they immediately, nuh-uh. And then it's like, okay, how am I going to explain this in a way? So I try to dumb it down and give the facts and figures, which then they get buried under an avalanche of data that does prove them wrong and makes them feel bad, because especially when it's in a public forum, they just got schooled. And not many people have an ego to say, you know what, my bad, you clearly know more than I do, I just learned something today. Most people are not like that. So I have a hard time dealing with people like that. There have been times where I thought I was right, and then someone shows me the chart, shows me the graph, shows me this, and it's like, oh, well, all right, you win. Other people, it's all about ego, and unfortunately with biking, so much of motorcycling is ego. People like being the cool biker. They like to be the badass. And most of us aren't badasses. I mean, some of us can ride better than others, but no matter what you think you are, there's someone bigger, badder, faster, smarter, whatever. I'm going to need to get home before that rain opens up, because it's raining about 5 miles north, and that's a lot of rain. So anyway, that's my little bit of vlogging for today. So far, this map feels great. I feel this tiniest hint of that, not twitchiness, but just that sensitivity in the throttle. And to be honest, I'm just going to freaking leave it. This thing's running great. It's pulling hard. I do wish we could figure out why Tune ECU doesn't let me apply those throttle tables to gears 5 and 6. It's only 1 through 4. And in other triumphs, like a 2018 Street Triple RS, when you make those throttle changes to the ETV3 tables, it'll let you apply them in neutral, which doesn't make any sense, but also all the way through the rev range up into 6th. This bike only lets you unrestrict 1 through 4. And 5 and 6, I guess, are still using the old tables. They must be hard-coded somewhere else in there. But I do feel it pulling less than 5th and 6th. I can still feel that little bit of hesitation up there. But at least in gears 1 through 4, that's where you spend most of your time, you know, riding aggressively and running through the gears in the mountains. I mean, you're not normally in 5th or 6th. So yeah, there it is. I'm very happy with this map. If you want to try it, I'll throw it up in the description. So if you get to this point, you're like, hey, I want to try that map. Where do I get it? Go and look in the description. I put things up there so people, and I try to answer those questions so people don't have to ask them. And then it's always going to be that guy that's, hey, this is cool. Where do I get this? It's like, it's right there. Anyway, the bike feels glorious. It sounds good. Throttle is just instant. There's no lag now at all. It's a little snappier down low, and it's a lot snappier in the mid-range. Top is not so much more snappy because I'd already restricted up top, but it's that mid-range getting up to there that you feel the most difference. And if people are like, oh, how much difference can a throttle map make? You're not really adding horsepower. It's not a better tune. Okay, take your bike. I don't care if it's this, if it's a ZX14, if it's a Busa, if it's a Grom, whatever. Put it in the full, whatever the full sport or track mode, go ride it. And then put it in rain mode and go ride it. You tell me there's not a significant difference between the two. You can say, well, rain mode's really restricted. So is sport on this bike. So is sport on a lot of bikes. Sport may be a lot less restricted than rain mode, so it's a lot more powerful, but you're not getting full power even in sport mode. That was true of the R1, that was true of the ZX900 or Z900 RS. Most bikes are still restricted. And that's why the ECU flash is so important, because power commanders can't get rid of that. Power commanders can help you tune it, and maybe you pick up some power and throttle response because you're at a much better air-fuel ratio that makes the motor happy, but you can't get rid of those restrictions. If the throttle plates on the ZX10 are closing down 1500 RPM shy of redline, and you get up to your peak power, let's just say it's 12,000, I don't have the chart in front of me, so my numbers may be up, but you get off the chart, you get up to 12,000 RPM and it's peak, and then it falls off a cliff until 14.5. Well, when it's no longer shutting the throttle bodies down to 50% at 12,000, all of a sudden the peak power is no longer at 12,000. You just picked up 20 horsepower up top. Not because of the tune, but because you told the throttle plates, hey, if the rider's at 100% throttle, give it goddamn 100% throttle plate opening. Give it power. Don't cut back. And so sport modes on these bikes, while not as restrictive and much better than rain mode, I always thought there's a shit ton of gravel there that nobody seems to want to get out. It's definitely still restricted. And I was getting rid of before just the top end restrictions, and it didn't even occur to me, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of mid-range restrictions in here. So I've punched up, in some cases like 20%. So go get yourself my map. If you've got a basically stock 2021, if you got the new Euro 5, and you can tell if you got the right year, just look at your forks. If you don't have the fork rubber gaiters, you got upside down forks, then this map will work for you. I've got a US version, and I've got a all countries version, but I think you can actually just use the US for any of them. But then your dealer, if they ever look at it, they'll go, hey, that map number doesn't match what should be in there. So you can take my map if you want, open up Tune ECU and just copy over ETV and ETV2 and whatever else I have in there. You can just make your own copy. But anyway, giving it a thumbs up. I think I'm going to stop dicking around with that for now. I got my springs coming tomorrow. That'll be good for my weight. We're going to do a video of installing those. And then we'll see how she handles. But this bike is coming along nice. Later, everybody.